Good morning, brilliant students. Today we are modeling direct variation, or we are going to graph direct variation. Another word for direct variation is proportional. So if you hear that, that means the exact same thing. What it means is all of our graphs are going to go through the origin, that point 0, 0. So it doesn't matter what our slope is. If it goes through the origin, it is a proportional graph or a direct variation graph. So that's what it says right here. The graph of a direct variation equation is a line through the origin. The slope of the graph of y equals ax is a. So this is just another way of saying y equals mx plus b. I don't know why they use the letter a. Just use m instead like we normally do. And they didn't put plus b on here because b is always going to be 0. So instead of writing y equals mx plus b, they wrote y equals mx because we don't really write plus 0. And then if you ever hear what is the constant of variation, that is just your slope, m. Because that's what we're going to graph over and over and over again. You're constantly graphing your slope. Rise 2, run 1. Rise 2, run 1. Rise 2, run 1. Or whatever your slope might be. So we're going to graph these two direct variation equations. They are in the form y equals mx plus b. So here, this is really plus 0. So if we identify our m, our slope, it's 2 over 3. And then our b, the y-intercept, is 0. So begin at 0. And our slope is rise over run. Rise 2, up 2, and run 3 to the right. Positive numbers are to the right, so to the right. Up 2, run 3. Rise over run. The opposite of going up and right would be going down and left, so down 2, 3 to the left. So there we have our equation. Go ahead and draw your line through it. And put arrows on both ends. That's the equation y equals 2 over 3x. Same thing here, but this one we need to solve. In order to solve for y, I'm going to divide by 12. Now you need to simplify, otherwise it's not going to fit on the graph. 12 over 24 is not going to fit. 24 divided by 12 is really a negative 2x. So our m, our slope, in front of the x is negative 2, but since we're going to graph this, we need it as a fraction, negative 2 over 1. And then b would really be plus 0. So we're beginning at 0. That's not new. That's something that direct variation graphs always go through 0. But our slope is rise over run. We're really not going up this time because it says negative 2. That's really going down. And then positive 1 is to the right. Down 2, 1 to the right. Down 2, 1 to the right. The opposite of down and right would be up and left. So up 2, 1 to the left. And there is our equation. Put some arrows on it, and we're done. Alright, next it says, tell whether the equation represents direct variation. We will know it's direct variation if in the equation y equals mx plus b, b is really a 0. If it is, identify the constant of variation. Our constant of variation is really our m, our slope. Okay? So let's solve this for y. We can't tell unless it's solved for y. So this is really a negative 1x. So I'm going to move that 1x. It's negative, so I'm going to add 1x. So those eliminate. We have y equals, and then we write your x's first, 1x plus 1. This one, in order to identify if it's direct variation, b just has to be 0. If it's any other number, it's not. So b here is really a 1, so no, this is not direct variation. Because b is not 0. Over here, let's solve this one. If I move this 2x, subtract 2x, I would have y equals negative 2x. If I want to write plus 0, I can. Well, is b a 0? Yep, it is. So yes, this is direct variation. And it says identify the constant of variation, or our slope. Our slope is negative 2. Same thing on this last one. We're going to solve for y. So I'm going to move this 4x. Right now this is positive, so I'm going to subtract 4x. Those eliminate. We have negative 5y equals negative 4x. And then the opposite of multiply is divide. So we have y equals, two negatives make a positive 4/5 x. So is this direct variation? Is b 0? It sure is. So yes, this is direct variation. And then our slope is 4/5. They wanted to know the constant of variation. Next, we have two problems that we are going to write an equation. It says the graph of a direct variation equation is shown. Write the direct variation equation. So that is in the form y equals mx plus b. We just know b is going to be 0 because it goes through the origin. Then, so this would be part 2, find the value of y when x equals 8. So let's stick to this first part, writing an equation. We know it's going to be plus 0, so the only thing we really need to find is the slope. Well, we have 2 points here. We can just count our slope, rise over run. So starting on the left in our elevator, go down 2, so that's negative 2, and over, so down 2, and running 1, 2. 2 over 2 is really just a negative 1. 2 over 2 is just 1. So our equation is y equals negative 1x plus 0. Well, that's our equation. That's part 1. We're done. Part 2 says find y, so we need to figure out what is y right here, when x is 8. So I'm just going to take an 8 and plug it in for x. Y equals negative 1 times 8. I don't really need to write plus 0. Well, negative 1 times 8 is just negative 8. So we have two answers, our equation, and then plug in when x is 8. We're going to do the same thing right here. First, we're going to write an equation in the form y equals mx plus b, and then we're going to plug in when x is 8. Well, we know our equation has to be plus 0 at the end because it's going through the origin. Let's just count our slope. We're rising 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're running 1, 2, 3, 4. So our slope is 5 over 4, so 5 over 4x. There's our equation. Y equals 5 over 4x plus 0. The only thing we needed to find was our slope. Now, plug in when x is 8. So y equals 5 over 4 times x, which is 8, and plus 0. Well, 8 is really 8 over 1, so if we multiply straight across, 5 times 8 is 40, 4 times 1 is 4, so 40 over 4 gives us 10. And if you're not sure if that makes sense, look at your graph. If when x is 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 would be right over here, would it make sense that y is somewhere at about 10? Maybe up here. I know that's not in your graph. But if we were to continue this line, it would continue through that point. Okay? Oops, whoa, what happened? Alright, next. It says, tell whether the table represents direct variation. If so, write the direct variation equation. So, we have this equation, y equals mx. We can actually solve this for our m, our slope, to figure out what we can plug in to figure out our slope. So if we solve this for m, to move the x, the opposite of multiplying by x would be divide by x. X over x is just 1. So we have m is really our y value divided by our x value. So if we have a table with x's and y's, and they're telling us that this is a direct variation equation, tell whether it's a direct variation equation. If so, write the equation in the form y equals mx plus b. So to find our slope, we're just going to take y and divide it by x. So y is 5. We're going to divide it by x, which is 1. Well, 5 divided by 1 is 5. Now, if that pattern continues all the way across, this is going to be a direct variation equation, because our slope should be the same over and over and over and over again to make a nice straight line. But if it's not a straight line, if it goes up and then over and then up and then who knows, like some weird funky line, that's not going to be a direct variation equation. So let's continue taking y and divide by x. So 10 divided by 2 is also 5. 15 divided by 3 is also 5. So far we got a straight line. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So we know that over and over and over again, up 5 over 1, up whatever. This is really our slope, what we just found. That's what they told us. So our equation would just be y equals 5x plus 0, or just y equals 5x. Same thing here, we're going to take our y's and we're going to divide it by our x's. So negative 2 divided by negative 3. Well, I know two negatives make a positive. If I plug this in my calculator, it would give me 0.6 repeating. If I take this y and divide it by x, 0 divided by negative 1, well, anything divided by 0 is 0. So far we have one slope that's 0.6 and one that's 0. That's not going to make a nice straight line. This is not direct variation. This is some other equation. Now, here we have two more problems. Instead of giving us x's and y's in a nice table, they just gave us one set of x and y, and they want us to tell you, or they want us to figure out what is the slope and to just write an equation. They're telling you, given that y varies directly with x, that's meaning it is a direct variation equation, so we know it's in this form, write the equation. So we just need to figure out what m is. So just like before, if I solve this for x, we're just going to take our y value and divide it by x. So 15 divided by negative 6 will give us our slope. Now you could leave it like this, but if I was going to tell you to graph that, that wouldn't quite fit on the graph. So I'm going to simplify. I'm going to divide both by 3, because I know they're both divisible by 3. And that would give me 5 over negative 2. So my equation would be y equals 5 over negative 2x, and it would be plus 0. If you wanted to write negative 2 over 5, that's the same. Doesn't matter where the negative goes. This one, same thing. We're going to take y, and we're going to divide it by x. So 1 divided by 1/4. Now this one, if you're going to type this in your calculator, you're going to type 1 divided by, and then in parentheses put 1 divided by 4. Or, some of you know 1/4 is 0.25. That'll give you our slope, which should be 4. Now, for those of you that's confusing, if you have $1 and you divide it into 1/4, you have 4 1/4, or 4 25-cent pieces. So that's our slope, but we need an equation. Y equals 4x. Because that's our m, our slope. Our last problem, I believe this is on your homework as well. Use a direct variation model. The table shows the amount of time, t, in seconds, it takes to download a file size s in kilobytes. Explain why s varies directly with t. So, right now, we know it is varying directly. Explain why it does. So we know, reminder, this is just an XY table. They just use the letters t and s instead. If it's varying directly, we're going to take our y values and divide by our x values to give us our slope, just like we did in these problems. So y is 420, and we're going to divide by 15. If I plug that in my calculator, it should give me 28. Now I need to see if these are all going to equal 28. So let's take 840, my y value, and divide it by 30, my x value. That one also gives me 28. Let's check the third one just to be sure. 1,260 divided by 45. Well, what do you know? 28. So explain why s varies directly with t. Our slope is the same over and over. What we like to say is the slope is constant. Constant meaning it's not changing. I don't know why I put a comma there. And our slope is really 28. So now it says write a direct variation equation in the form y equals mx plus b that relates s and t. Well, if I use it like this first, it would be y equals 28x. But they didn't use y and x, they used s and t. So y is really the letter s, and x is really the letter t. So this is our equation that they want. Then last it says, how long will it take to download an 800 kilobyte file? Well, kilobytes, that's KB, that's really our y value or our s value. So 800 kilobytes we're plugging in for s. So 800 equals 28 times t. All I did was rewrite this equation, but with the 800 there instead. So if I solve this by dividing by 28, I need to plug that in my calculator. And my answer, I get t all by itself. 800 divided by 28. In my calculator, I get 28.57, but it says round to the nearest second. Be careful. Some of you rounded this down. 5 or higher, we are always going to round up. So 28.5 would round up to the nearest second, 29 seconds. So it would almost take you 30 seconds to download an 800 kilobyte file. This is a little bit old, probably would take a lot less time now. So make sure you grab your worksheet and get started. The directions for 10, 11, and 12 are here, and those same directions continue onto this page. So if you don't know what to do on this page, make sure the directions are on the page before. Make sure to read those. All right? All right. Good luck.